In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains builds, operates, and maintains electric transmission infrastructure, connecting consumers to lower-cost energy sources to power our energy future. That means safe, secure, reliable electricity for those we serve. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.
Good evening and welcome to the Kansas Legislature right here on Smoky Hills Public Television in downtown Bunker Hill. I'm your moderator, Becky Kaiser, and we welcome you this evening. We have with us a couple of our area legislators. Furthest one away from me this evening is Representative Clarke Sanders, of course, who is from Salina with District number 69. And then also joining us this evening is Representative Ken Rahjes from Agra, and that, of course, is District 110. We want to encourage you to participate this evening. We have a toll-free number that you can call if you have a question or a comment of our legislators. That number is 1-800-337-4788. And our show, of course, is possible this evening thanks to our partner, ITC Great Plains, and also the Docking Institute at Fort Hays State University, the Docking Institute of Public Affairs, and we appreciate their participation as well. I am a fellow at the Docking Institute, and I also work for Eagle Communications, Eagle Radio, and Hays Post News in Hays. Well, you guys are on vacation, Representative Sanders, so I'm sure you just have kind of been sitting back and enjoying yourself. But actually, we'll talk about what you do in this interim period. But again, remind people what committees that you serve on and what you've been working on most recently.
So I have Fed and State, which meets at 9:30, and then I have Education that meets at 1:30, and I have Taxation that meets at 3:30. And all of my committees have been fairly active this year. It's been a very active year committee-wise, and it wasn't until lately that we really got busy on the floor. We really got busy on the floor this past Thursday night.
You had kind of a marathon session,
yeah,
didn't you?
Yeah, we gavelled out at 4:27 a.m.
Oh, wow.
I'm not a big fan of that, but it is what it is.
I thought there was discussion about not doing that kind of thing anymore.
There's a rule, and Dan Hawkins, who's the Speaker of the House, he came around and visited with all of us in their home counties this past summer prior to us electing the new leadership. And so there's a rule that says we can't start anything new after midnight. But what happens is when it looks like we're not going to get done by midnight, there's a motion and a vote to suspend the midnight rule. Now, I vote against it. And this year was a little bit different in that we actually had it up on the scoreboard. So we could see that I voted against it, but there were only 44 of us who voted against it and 70 some odd who voted for suspending it. But what I told Dan over the summer, I said, look, it makes no sense to me to suspend the midnight rule. Let's either not do that, which would be my preference, or let's not have a midnight rule. In essence, we don't have a midnight rule. It's on the books, but it gets regularly voted to suspend it, and I just I don't agree with that. But once it had been suspended, there were multiple attempts by the Democrats to end before 4:27 by calling for an adjournment, and I voted against the adjournment. You know, we're past midnight, we might as well keep going until we get done, but unfortunately the Senate fell apart and we weren't able to get done. So now when we go back on April 26th, we'll finish up our work.
Representative Rahjes, tell us again a little bit about your committee work.
You bet. I chair the Agriculture Committee in the House. I also serve on Appropriations and also Higher Ed Budget. I'm the past chairman of that. So it has been a somewhat busy session. obviously in appropriations, you know, you kind of touch every agency and everyone that gets an appropriation from the state. So that is, we worked on a few things in agriculture, some cleanup things, and really we had so many new legislators overall that we did a lot of setup for next year. So when we're going to do some things in the off session once we do adjourn to work on things like industrial hemp and some other things that just take a long time because, Becky, the priority was water this year. Even though I didn't serve with the water committee, I wanted to be sure to help them wherever we could as an agriculture committee. And so that's where, and we had some of the bills that water typically would have handled, but you know, we wanted to make sure that we moved forward with water, and so that's kind of where we were with that. The higher ed, well, we all kind of know what's happened there. We cut a lot of funding out. We'll see if the governor comes back with a provision in the budget. If not, we'll probably have tuition increases. Who knows how much? But in order to kind of make that all work, we've all been buzzed by inflation, and it's more than just 3 or 4%. It may be upwards of 8 to 9, and so we're all trying to make that make it fit as best we can. But even though we do have a surplus, everybody thinks that if there is a surplus, that should go to them. And so that's been one of the big challenge. I've had a lot of visitors in my office this year saying, well, it's only you know, $500 million, you know, and when you have a couple billion. But one thing we have done, Becky, is we've worked pretty hard to put more money into the rainy day fund or the ending balance, whatever you want to call it. So we're not, you know, we've done be able to do some tax relief, some, maybe not as much as what many of us would like, but trying to be responsible so we don't run into situations, because we still, many of us believe that the economy is still on shaky ground.
You mentioned higher ed and the funding there. We want to kick off this evening's topic about a law that was just signed into law this afternoon by Governor Laura Kelly regarding the affiliation of Fort Hays State University, Northwest Kansas Technical College out in Goodland, and then North Central Kansas Technical College in Hays. And that is something that I guess is kind of groundbreaking for the state. First of all, why does the state legislature have to get involved in that? Well,
the way you know that we are structured is that we do have on the books that when you have an affiliation or a merger or anything along that line, and by the way, this is an affiliation, everybody's still keeping their identities, but the legislature has to kind of approve it and sign off on it as one of those formal agreements, so that they're aware, and so you don't have one, in a sense, institution going after and trying to, you know, gobble up without a bunch of stops. There are a bunch of stops that take place. Just quickly on this one, you know, it came from the two presidents of the technical colleges, I believe, approached Fort Hays. They put together a proposal, went back to those boards. That was approved, and then it went to the Board of Regents. And then once they approved it, then a bill, and then we worked through the legislative process of a hearing and so on and so forth, and voting in both houses. Went through very, very well. What this is, it's not every program, but there was already some arm's length going on at Fort Hays with North Central in the Hays location. Now there's a big one in Beloit as well.
Yes.
And so they were doing some welding and some other things. And so the idea is that if a student wants to learn a technical trade, they may want to also get their bachelor's degree and be able to do that at Fort Hays or now remotely as well. All institutions have great programs. Goodland has a tremendous agriculture technology using drones and other things, and so if you can piece that together with some of the offerings, we all know the great things that Fort Hays does. So I think all three institutions looked at it and their boards, how can we do our part to strengthen Northwest Kansas by having students go to these institutions, want to stay here and build the economy of the strengths that we have, and we'll see how it all develops. No, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how the whole thing goes, and it's not, you know, it's not going to be right here we're done. It's going to take a little bit, kind of a ramp up, if you will, but I think it's a great day for the state of Kansas.
Exciting news. I'm glad you mentioned Beloit. I forgot to say that of course they're also a main large campus there for North Central Kansas Technical College. And we should add that the plan, as you said, this is almost a step-by-step process, still not done. The Higher Learning Commission still has to take a look at that. Now that's the accrediting body for the institutions.
And I think that's this, if not this summer, this fall, and so that's a normal process. As you know, say if it was a school develops new programs, wants to offer a new major, it goes through the process too, from the university standpoint, then the regents, and then the Higher Learning Council. And so again, there's those checks and balances all the way through.
You talked about the funding for higher ed. Because this is an affiliation, they will still have their separate budgets then each
Absolutely,
campus
absolutely. I think
institution.
Fort Hays is going to help them with maybe some of the bookkeeping, if you will. But yes, they're still technical college, those two, and then we're just working as that affiliation, if you will, through different classes and maybe some other majors, and vice versa. You may have a student at Fort Hays that may want to take maybe some technical classes. They're still developing a lot of this.
All right. Again, we want to remind you that it's your chance to participate this evening. You can give a comment or ask a question of our legislators. There's a toll-free number that you can call, 1-800-337-4788. We invite you to do that. Clarke, let's come back to you today again with some more information, action by the governor late this afternoon. And one issue that was vetoed, and I know that you were very much involved with this, was what we call the Born Alive Infants Protection Act.
Infant Born Alive.
Infant Born Alive, and it was actually vetoed by the governor. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm shocked and I'm very surprised. It's a good bill. She doesn't have the votes. We passed it out of the House with 88 votes. We only need 84 to override a veto, and there were 2 of our Republicans who were absent the day we passed it, so we potentially have 90 votes. I don't see where she's going to find 6 votes. It passed in the Senate with 31 votes. They only need 27 in the Senate to override a veto. So she already has lost a major veto override on the fairness in women's sports. And I was really surprised to see that she vetoed this. It will be overridden, it will become law, and it's just going to be another loss for her. I think it's fairly safe to say she's the most overridden, veto overridden governor in the history of Kansas.
Really?
Yeah, back in 2021, we overrode 9 vetoes in one day. Now last year we only overrode 1. We've got 1 already this year, and we're going to get at least another one in the Infant Born Alive, and I'm sure there'll be some other things she's going to veto. But it's really disheartening. So for people who don't understand what this bill is about, it says if there is an infant who survives an abortion, is fully out of the womb, completely out of the mother, has a heartbeat, breathing on its own, and has muscle movement. Now that's a human being. And if somebody is in that state, then this bill requires that they receive appropriate medical attention. Now obviously we can't mandate that that baby be saved, but we can say it's inappropriate to put that baby on a table and wheel it into the corner and wait for it to die. There must be an effort made to attempt to save that baby. And if you can, great, and if you can't, well, that's unfortunate, but that baby then passes. So I don't understand how out of the womb, muscle movement, heartbeat, breathing on its own, how anybody can say that's not a human being. You know, what are we talking about here? So I was clearly very disappointed that the governor signed that, and I'm hoping that the very first piece of business that we take up when we go back on April 26th is this veto override, but I don't know what the schedule is going to be. It'll definitely be taken up, and unless something unbelievably amazing happens, we will have the votes to override this.
Well, we'll
and it'll
check
be
back in
her
with you.
second high-profile veto loss.
We'll check back in then on April 26th, and then a couple days later. We want to go to our phone line now. We have Ron from Hayes. You have a question or comment for the legislators this evening, Ron?
Yes, I was wondering when and if we were ever going to get a keeper's COLA. Since we've had such high inflation and everything, Social Security got adjusted. Keepers hasn't been adjusted in years.
So what Ron's
Are
talking
we
about
ever
is
gonna get
capers.
something?
And thank you, Ron. And the short answer is no. Capers is a defined benefit. And what that means is it's not subject to the fluctuations in the market. If the market goes up, you know, and it wasn't a defined benefit, well, you'd be happy because you'd be gaining the market going up. But when the market goes down, you would be losing. And you're not, you don't lose because it is a defined benefit. Now, last year we invested a lot of federal dollars to help shore up capers, but no, there is not going to be a COLA for capers.
We might remind people who qualifies for capers, who can be in that system.
Well, there's a variety of us. I mean, anybody, as best I know, working for the government at any level can.
Educators.
Yeah, educators, police, fire, legislators, it's you know the
Several tiers.
tiers
Right.
and different tiers and that sort of thing. It's a pretty complicated system. Our good friend Stephen Johnson, who is now the state treasurer, he's kind of the capers expert. And Ron, you can call the treasurer's office and ask to speak to Stephen, and I'm sure he'd be happy to explain it to you. But Ken, would you agree that there is not going to be a COLA for capers?
Yeah, what happened was back in the 90s, there was one year where it happened. And so then, and we had groups come to the Capitol this year, but as my colleague says, Representative Sanders, I mean, it's a defined benefit plan. It's pretty much set. You know, maybe it's unfortunate, and it is unfortunate, you know, that those things can't happen, but it's hopefully a stabilizer as the market goes up or down. And so that's kind of where we are. I don't.
Right.
You know,
And it's one of those things that was never designed to fully take care of you once you retire.
Right.
I mean, it's got to be part of a portfolio, which obviously would include capers and your Social Security and what other investments you have. It was never intended to fully fund your retirement.
All right. Well, Ron, thank you for your question. And if you have a comment or question that you would like to present to our legislators, again, we have a toll-free number that you can call this evening. 1-800-337-4788 is that telephone number. I wanted to talk a little bit about the action by the governor today. There was a second veto, Representative Rahjes, regarding, now I forgot, Eddie Eagle.
Eddie
Yes,
Eagle.
remind us who Eddie Eagle
All
is
right.
and what this is about.
Well, this is a safety program. I'm not going to call it hunter safety because that's not what
Gun
it is.
safety, I think.
Gun safety, not hunters. I apologize. Part of the deal is this is sponsored by the NRA, and so that gets a lot of people excited. This is not the first time she's done this. This is not the first time we've passed it. I noticed in the votes we didn't have a veto proof when it passed, so I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. But I think in light of some other things going on, all these things, quite honestly, Becky, are thrown into politics. You know, I was not shocked that the governor vetoed the Born Alive. It's the politics. It's the politics, the pro-life, pro-choice. That's what it is. And so when you have certain bases, you have to appease them, whether you're Republicans or Democrats. See, I'm going to go off of the rails here, and people are going to say, "Well, gosh, Ken, where are you?" Well, but that's what it is. It's kind of the same thing with this. In order to appeal to those that are opposed to anything that has the NRA on it, they're going to be opposed to it, and then she will be as well. I think one of the things that the misnomer is that that's kind of the nose, the camel went again underneath the tent, and all of a sudden NRA is now in our schools. This is simply a matter of what we all talk about is more education and more, so we all handle guns safely. That's what this is. It just happens to be, it's America, patriotism, and being a good, responsible gun owner. I don't know what the problem is with that, but again, it's, we watch it on other TV channels, and so Becky, it spills back down, and it's in the halls of Topeka. It's even in our town halls, and so that's just kind of the world we live in. So I don't know what's going to happen if leadership decides to go ahead and run that, but it may not. We may not choose to run the veto if it isn't successful, because then that would maybe send a black mark on of not being able to override that. So we'll see. We have a lot of work to get done in those 3 days of the veto session. I'm afraid.
It is just 3 days.
Yes.
Well, you think?
It will be.
We'll see.
Theoretically.
So real quick, what Eddie Eagle is. Eddie Eagle is a gun safety program, and as Representative Rahjes says, it's the NRA gun safety program, and therein lies the rub, because there's some legislators that as soon as those 3 letters are attached to it, they're automatically against it. But basically what it teaches 4 tenets to young people, and if you see a firearm, like on the street or in a desk or whatever, stop, don't touch, run away, tell an adult. That's it. That's the program in a nutshell. Now, what the bill is talking about is if a school is going to have gun safety lessons, or guns, they're going to train in gun safety, you have to have either Eddie Eagle or a program based on the Eddie Eagle criteria of stop, don't touch, run away, tell an adult. That's if you're going to have one. Now, there is no requirement in the bill that any school district has a gun safety program. But if you're going to have it, that's what it has. It either has to be Eddie Eagle or something based on the principles of Eddie Eagle.
Was there ever discussion about a firearm safety program that did not involve the Eddie Eagle and NRA's tenets?
There was a second
Right.
one that was brought up, and I forget what it was, but it really never launched. So at this point, it's Eddie Eagle or nothing, and I agree with Ken. I don't know where we're at on having the votes to override a veto.
Well, we'll find out a little more
Yeah,
again
we
on
will.
April 26th. Again, we want to invite you to participate in our show this evening. You can give a call to us toll-free, 1-800-337-4788, if you have a comment or a question of our legislators this evening. Let's talk a little bit about it. Not that it had anything to do with legislation signed by the governor or vetoed by the governor today, but it's, boy, is it in the news, whether or not we should have a flat tax for the residents and taxpayers of Kansas. And there are pros and cons, people who support it, people who don't for various reasons. First of all, I guess I'll ask you, Representative Rahjes, if you would explain what we mean by a flat tax,
Right.
as compared to what it is right now.
And I will defer to my friend who was on the tax committee.
Oh, of course,
who
you're
could
our
do
expert,
who
Clarke.
could do
Go
a much
ahead.
better job. I can give you my opinion, or what my thought is, but Clarke would know.
So the flat tax, and there were several numbers that had been bandied about, but we finally settled on 5.15%. So that would be the state income tax. And it was part of an overall package that involved property taxes, because there's some property tax reduction in this bill as well, and then sales tax. So the food sales tax, which, as you are aware, was reduced at the end of last session.
Right.
The governor has been a big advocate to accelerate that. She wanted it to go to 0 on July 1st. Well, what this bill says is it's going to go to 0 on January 1st. And then another big component, and I've never seen something, a proposal that was more dead on arrival than this one, but there was an idea floated that we would eliminate the ability of local units of government to charge sales taxes on food. And that, not only did that not have liftoff, it never got wheeled out to the launching pad. It was going nowhere. So that, so local units of government will still be able to impose a food sales tax. Now, they don't have to, of course, but it'll be their choice. And then Social Security income, the amount of tax that you pay on that has been reduced under this bill.
I'm going to stop you there for just a second. I heard on a national radio show today, and they had some Kansas news talking about that there are actually retirees and people who have Social Security leaving Kansas because they can go to many other states where they don't have to pay the additional tax. So that
and they don't have
accurate.
to pay any state income tax at all. And it is definitely a big concern, and it's something that we talk about repeatedly in tax committee, how many people do leave the state of Kansas because especially for retirees, they can get a much better deal in Missouri, and that is not much of a move, and it is definitely a big concern, and it's something that needs to be addressed, and that's what SB 169 hopes to accomplish. But we ended up getting it passed out of the House at like 2:30 a.m. or something on that last day, and it went over to the Senate, and I don't think they took any, or did they end up
I
passing
think they did.
So they ended up passing it, so now it's on the governor's desk, and I'll see what, it'll be
I think
interesting.
she'll veto it. We're pretty sure she'll veto it because she doesn't like the flat tax. And what this does, this lowers it for, say, higher income, raises it a little bit for lower income. And so again, it's the politics of how could we gain political gain on this. And so, do we have the votes to override? Not sure exactly, because as we were voting on some of these, we had some senators leaving, and so that was kind of part of it. So that's where leadership, I think, is going to be meeting and determine, okay, where's our path to finish things up, some of these things we need to get done, tax, school finance, and so on, and then attack these overrides. There's a number of things in the tax bill. Again, we had a lot last year. This year we had, was it over 19 again? I don't know. There was
19.
Yeah.
Last year we had 28 bills bundled into one. This year we had 18 or 19, depending on how you want to define it. So I think it was, I think 19 is the number we settled on.
Yeah, so with 19, it's very easy to say no, or you say yes, and then you have to defend your position. And so there was things I didn't like at all, but there were some things that I did in order to get that and to get moving forward. Because part of the process that happens in all this, you can vote no all the time. But when you get right down to it, where we are now at the end of the session, these last few days, people aren't going to come to you and say, what's it going to take for you to help me get this done? If we know you're going to be a no and say you have something to help your community or help others, well, if you're always a no, then where are you? Other than saying, well, I don't like this, I'm always going to vote against this. There may be 14 things that are absolutely great. But that's a decision. Sometimes it all makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. But to do all these things together, I was hoping that we would do it as we go. It didn't happen. I mean, yeah.
Why did it not happen?
Well, I think partly because we're trying to make some changes this year, and like with our calendar, with the schedule, as far as only 3 days. In the past, 3-ish, maybe 5-ish days, we may be there to finish up some of these bills. I think everybody had the intention of having all these big things done, so when we came back for veto, that's what we do. We just simply do the governor's vetoes. Well, we've got a few things to take care of. Now, some of us will be there a couple days early on appropriations to work on what they call the omnibus spending bill, because we'll have the projections, the April projections here of what of what our tax revenues will be, and then that's how we kind of base the budget on. So how it happens, I mean, in the perfect world, it's always going to be fine, but the world of reality, I think sometimes these things happen to get you in a position to where you're tired, or you throw your hands up and say, fine, I'll just do whatever. But there were some things that happened in the middle of the night that, some of us voted no for.
Aside from the omnibus, the education
Right.
budget isn't done. And
that's a big
Oh,
one.
that's a big chunk. That is a huge chunk, and it's
over half,
got to get,
yeah.
52%, something like that. So it's got to get done. That isn't done. That's why I'm not near as optimistic as my colleague here that we're
okay.
going to be out in 3 days.
Well, here's the deal. We will be out in 3 days, Clark, but don't take a summer vacation. That's probably what will happen. We will be done because if leadership says we'll end on a Friday, they won't keep us on over. I doubt if they keep us over the weekend. Again, I'm not leadership. I don't know. But you will lose people. If you go back and look, there's very few days we had all 125 people there.
Yep.
So people will start peeling off because they made their commitment, and if they say we're sticking with the calendar, this is what the calendar says, this is what we do. That's what I'm afraid of. If we don't have some of these big things done, we may be done, but may have to come back and then do a special session. Which, one, nobody likes a special session. Two, as a taxpayer, you should not like a special session.
No.
And so that's where I guess pray for your leaders so that we get direction and wisdom to figure out a way to get these things done.
When you talk about that, people peeling off, time commitments, that sort of thing, it makes me also think of the discussions that have been held about legislative pay, and should legislators make more than whatever your stipend is per day. It's not very darn much.
Well, we make $88.60 a day.
88.
But now that doesn't take into account the fact that we make, I think it's $115.50 a day in what is commonly called per diem. I think stipend is probably the correct word. We also get some mileage for driving to and from Topeka. So $88.66 is the salary. It's what's called the salary. And where this is at right now is there's going to be a commission hopefully set up that's going to study this.
An independent commission,
An
right?
independent commission, and it's only going to have the ability to make recommendations to the legislature. So they're going to go study this, and they're going to say, okay, here's what's happening in other rural states, here's what's happening in all 50 states, here's what we're recommending, and then the legislature can say, yeah, that's good, or we can say, no, we don't like that, or we can tweak it, or do whatever we want with it. But the initial blueprint is going to come from this commission.
I've heard legislators on this show talk about, ideally, this will help encourage more people to participate, because you guys, I'm joking about you being on vacation because I know that you're talking to constituents, going to coffees and answering emails and committee work, that sort of thing. And it's a huge commitment, and a lot of people, unless you're retired, and there are a lot of retirees in the Kansas legislature, and people, and right
I'm
here
one of them.
we have one in
No,
close to it.
I
No.
work. No.
Okay. Good.
As long as I have my voice, I don't retire. But and Becky, and I understand that, and I'm not sure where you voted on it, and I don't, we don't need to get into that. I voted against it. It happened in the middle of the night. One of the last things we did, even though it was just a commission, and I get it. We are still a citizen legislative body. There we go. And so, and I appreciate the fact that some say we may not be diversified enough. We've had young people in and out, and those of us in our prime earning years, if you will. I guess I'll give myself a break in my age. But we know what we get into this. If we're doing it for the money, we're doing it for the wrong reasons.
Agreed.
Why I voted against, now the main reason why I voted against it, one, I'm not going to vote for a pay increase or a potential pay increase in the middle of the night. That's wrong. The second thing is, what the Senate did was put in provisions like the governor would go from $98,000 to what a member of Congress makes, $174,000. That's wrong. and those other constitutional officers would get huge pay raises. That's wrong. That's to do a big jump. Now, not that they're not worth it, but again, public service is public service, Becky. If we're getting rich doing public service, then again, who are we serving? Are we serving the people of Kansas, or are we serving our own self-interest? And I am very passionate about this because absolutely, I don't make money doing this, and that's okay. I knew what I was getting into when I did it. But if we can help people, that's fine. But if it comes to where I think they're saying something maybe from that $86, I think one of the deals for the legislature was it was more when we're off session. Right now, I think we get
$708 a month.
Well, you get a lot more than me then. But anyway, but by the time you take all our things out, maybe bump that up a little bit, which makes sense, which is kind of subsistence when we're not in session. And so, those are the things. I would much rather be wanting to help the rank and file Kansas workers, the ones that work for the state of Kansas. I still want folks to feel good about being a state employee. I want people to feel proud to work for the state of Kansas. We have great opportunities. We do have great benefits. We have a lot of good things. This isn't a commercial for the state, but what I'm saying is somehow through this whole thing, we are downplaying the importance of state employees. And so our small little part, if it can go to our assistance or to help others, especially those ones that get up every day and work for the people of Kansas, those are the ones we need to help first. And then the rest of this will come later. Because, what I do when I'm not doing this, I don't put a tie on. I go out and work for a living. This 2 weeks, I have something every day. Plus, I got my regular job. So this, Topeka is kind of a time to slow down a little bit because you're almost in your schedule is much more firm because you know the things you have to do. But I'm sorry to go off of that, but it's important to look at it, I would agree. But I think we need to be very cautious, when we talk, because you hear that all the time. Congress does things like this in the middle of the night, gives themselves a cost of living or gives themselves something else. And I just don't think that's what we get elected to do, to go down and pat our pockets. So what would happen is if it's enough that's what you can do full time, all you do as a legislator, then you lose touch with the reality of the people you're representing.
The average stay of a representative in the state of Kansas is 4.1 years.
Oh, really?
You get elected twice and you're generally done. You either retire or you get beat or you run for the Senate or whatever, for whatever reason. 2 terms is about it. And I agree with Ken. This is a citizen body. And if you start doing it for the money, he's right, you're doing it for the wrong reason. I would submit that the most thankless job in politics is a local school board job. They have 5 constituencies. They have the teachers, the students, the administration, the parents, and the taxpayers. There is no possible way you can keep 5 constituencies happy. There's always going to be people mad at you all the time. You know what they get paid? 0. And that's mandated by state statute. You don't get paid anything, and that is probably the single hardest job in elected politics, and they get nothing.
We thank them as well.
Absolutely we do.
We want to remind you that you are invited to participate in our show this evening. You can give us a call toll free, 1-800-337-4788 if you have a question or a comment for our legislators this evening. And we do have someone on the phone right now from Salina. Gordon is on the line. Gordon, your question or comment, please?
Yes. My grandson's a common laborer. He's making $23 an hour. That's more than the legislature does.
That makes
Well,
me,
good for him.
yes, yes. That makes me think we were talking about the VOTech colleges in Goodland and Hayes and Beloit, and I was thinking as you were talking about that, they have excellent programs in industrial sciences, and those are some really great
Right.
jobs out there that are
Absolutely.
portable.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if Gordon was saying maybe we should get real jobs and use our hands, but and we thank folks like that. And you're right, Becky, and a lot of folks, you know, that go to the tech route are hired sometimes even before they can get that certificate done, or as soon as the day they graduate, that next day or that Monday, then they're working and doing quite well. And that's one thing when we talk about what Gordon's grandson was making or others. The labor is a challenge here in the state, not only for state employees but just in general. And as we look at just the cost of doing business to find workers, $15 doesn't get too many people excited. But can we afford 23 for how long? For manual labor, then that adds up the cost. And so it's all well, but as our dearly departed friend Rush Limbaugh used to say, make the minimum wage $100 an hour. Costs will continue to go up. It's, you know, as that base, you know, sometimes that is pandering. We talk, well, we need a living wage. Well, everything else will go up with it. So as far as to ever try to get ahead, it doesn't happen. I know we want it to, and in the books we can write, it can do that. But in reality, it's very difficult to make that happen.
Clarke, let's go back to education again. We were talking about that earlier, and also talking about with some of the senators being gone, and something that again is back in the news, and is the Senate President Ty Masterson saying that he's hoping that the Senate will look at school vouchers again, that when the vote was taken, there were 2 or 3 senators gone, wants to look at that again.
Okay, so first off, we're trying to change the language. Now, vouchers, everybody understands vouchers. What we would prefer these days is that you refer to it as educational savings accounts, ESAs.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so educational savings accounts, and yes, there are many of us who are in favor of having educational savings accounts, and there is a lot of opposition. Pretty much anybody involved in public education, for the most part, is against ESAs. But here's where I fall on this. What is in the best interest of the parents and the children? And we have a lot of public schools that do great jobs. We have a lot of great public school teachers in this state. But the fact of the matter is, not in every instance is public education the right path. For some kids, they would thrive much better in a private school situation, an accredited private school situation. So why shouldn't the parents of those children have the ability to direct? They wouldn't get the money. The money would go to the state treasurer, but they could direct that a certain portion of their taxes go to pay tuition at a private school. I think that was what would be in the best interest of Kansas kids, and that's why I support it.
I don't understand. Explain to me where this money comes from. It's actually the parents' money in the first place that they've paid to the state. Is that income tax we're talking about?
Well, of course, a major portion of your taxes, wherever you know, property tax or sales tax or income tax, goes to fund education, 52%.
Okay, so we're talking about the whole, all of them
thing.
combined.
And
okay.
what this would do is it would provide for a portion of the money, and again, this is kind of a critical piece of this, it doesn't go to the parents. The parents don't see it. It's an educational savings account that goes to the state treasurer, and the parent has the ability to direct where it's spent.
What do you think of that, Ken?
Well, Clarke and I do disagree on this issue, and I would guess most of our audience probably has a little piece of mail that has my picture when I was a new legislator. That one group decided that instead of looking at the big picture of the whole bill, we carved that out. And so here's the deal. Educational savings accounts, I'm not necessarily opposed to them, but the district I represent, sorry, 110th district,
Is rural.
rural. I have a lot of 1A schools. I have a lot of 2A schools. And what I saw in this bill was beyond just the educational savings accounts, but doing things that could harm our small schools. I got reelected to go back down there and to fight for our small schools. I don't represent a Salina. I don't represent a Wichita. I don't represent a Kansas City or a Johnson County, a Blue Valley, whatever. I think eventually we will get something worked out to where that will work. But this thing was pushed through by a small group of people of a committee and then given, and that was our choice. So I am not against private school, if you want to make that effort, but I think there are other ways if students are struggling, kids are struggling, that then this wide, broad range, and there are also situations where it's not just a struggling kid that may be a well-off family, all of a sudden the state will be paying for their education. I have some real concern with that as we move forward. The Senate didn't take it up. I don't know if the Senate has the votes. That will be something that will be discussed on all these different policy issues. I wish we could do policy one way, funding another. But in order to get the votes for funding for K-12, you have to put in policy things. And then you put pressure on by outside groups. And I've been here longer. I've been over my 4.5 years.
Yeah.
Okay? But when people call me all the time and ask me, and when I explain the reason why I support public education in the district I represent, they go, oh. Instead of reading the headline and thinking all of a sudden that those of us that are opposed to an idea. No, we're not opposed to an idea. It was the bill. And that's what gets frustrating as far as the politics of our internal politics is we love to play gotcha.
And the political reality, and Ken's done a good job tonight talking about political reality, is this is going nowhere.
Really?
That's the reality. We passed it in the House with 65 votes. We need 84 to override a veto. It's most definitely going to be overridden, and we're not even going to attempt it's definitely going to be vetoed, and we're going to have nowhere near the votes to override it, even if it gets through the Senate. So this is not going to be happening this time around.
Another area of education funding I wanted to ask you gentlemen about is the governor was in some western Kansas small schools this week, including Ellis, just to the west of Hayes, and talking about special education specifically. She had some roundtables there with people patrons of the district and teachers and students, which was great. But she is talking about the need for increased special education funding. And I know I've heard from other legislators about the federal government is supposed to be paying a pretty good sized chunk of that, and apparently has not been, and that is making states have to make up the difference in general budget funding, and that's not a good thing. So where do we stand on that? Are we agreeing with the governor?
We had special education funding in the ESA bill, and obviously that was in there for political reasons. As Ken mentioned, it's one thing, take it or leave it, and so by voting against it, the claim can be made, and I'm not saying it's accurate, that you voted against funding special education, because it was in that bill.
Right.
But the reason it was in there was pure politics, because everybody's on board with funding special education. We don't fund it near to the level that we're supposed to, that we're constitutionally mandated. We're supposed to fund it to 92%, and I don't know that we ever get out of the low 80s. So it was actually, I looked this up my first year. This question came up, and I called up legislative research, and they sent me a chart, and the Brownback administration funded special ed better than the Kelly administration has. But neither one of them have been anywhere close to where it needs need or is supposed to be.
Another aspect of education, this was some information that came through recently about the testing scores for state math and reading tests apparently have been pretty low among our students in Kansas, and that at least one person, the education commissioner, Randy Watson, is on record as saying that schools should make that a priority to increase academic achievement and put money towards it. Is that something that the legislature is concerned about and would increase funding?
And what the educators will tell you, and I think they're right, is COVID really set us back. I mean, because, you know, we were out of school, kids were out of in-person school from the middle of March through the end of the school year back in, what was it, 2021 or 2020, and that really set us back, and it's going to take a while to recover.
But I guess the point being as well that happened everywhere across the nation. I think it's not just Kansas, so it's trying to recover from that. We have about 5 minutes left in our show, and we also have Dean on the phone from Hoisington. Dean, you have a question or comment about legislators this evening?
Yes, I'd like to thank both the legislators for appearing tonight. I agree with Representative Rahjes that the voucher bill is bad for the local school boards. I'm one of those long-term non-paid school board members, and there's very little in that bill that would be beneficial for what our districts do. And I also agree with your comment about the policy getting mixed in with funding. Over the years I've been on the school board, we've almost doubled our administrative staff just to deal with policy requirements that the legislature has imposed on us. So that's one of my pet peeves is we get all these requirements and then not necessarily rewarded for having to comply with it all. I'd like to thank you both for appearing.
Well, we'd like to thank you for serving on your local school board.
Well, that's true, and I think I know Dean, so he is one of the good ones, and that's the thing. I would encourage folks to think about running for your school board. Representative, I like when folks get involved.
Sure, I do too.
School board, even site council or PTA, whatever that is, that's where it all starts. And going back, wherever the legislature is on. We're very concerned, and I think the Education Committee, I'm not on either one of them, so I can't say that, but I know there's a lot of discussion. A big chunk of our budget goes to K-12 because of the lawsuit. We're fully funding it. Now we can talk about special ed all we want, and a lot of folks want a clean bill in the sense all we do is special ed funding. I don't know if that will ever happen. My concern is the next lawsuit's going to be on special ed and funding. But again, I always remind folks, if you get a chance to talk to your federal delegation or their staff, remind them how important it is for the federal government to pay their share as well. I think that would all go a long way for the state to help make that to swallow. That's a big pill to swallow. But when you look at the social programs and K-12 budget, that is almost 70%, if not more, of our state budget. So we do a lot of fighting over the 30%. But those two things. The Constitution says we must provide adequate education, and if that's the dollar amount, then that's what we do and we have more money due to the inflationary factors and some of the ramp-ups.
We have about 3 minutes left in our show, and I don't think any more time for calls, but Representative Sanders, I wanted to ask you, we were talking about our federal representatives, and you were involved in some legislation or proposed legislation about the Constitutional Convention in Kansas being brought along to do something about making that operation a little bit better. Where do we stand on that?
So what I was involved in, and I was the one who, what we called carried the bill, is I presented to the body what's commonly called Convention of States or an Article 5 Constitution. There are two ways to amend the Constitution of the United States as spelled out in Article 5. And the typical way, the way that it's been amended 27 times in the past, is for the proposed amendments to originate in the Kansas House or Senate, and then it goes through a process where it has to be eventually approved by 3/4 of the states. But there's another process, and that's what's called a convention of states, and that's where the states get together, have a convention. Each state has one vote. I really like that. So California has no more or no less power than Kansas, and Kansas has no more or no less power than Wyoming. And we propose amendments to the Constitution. But those amendments still have to go through the confirmation process. In other words, any amendment that would come out of a convention of states would have to be approved by 3/4 of the states, and they could either do that at the legislative level, or they could have the citizens of the state vote to approve or not approve any proposed amendment. I think the fact of the matter is our government spending, our federal government spending is out of control, and one of the amendments would be to get it back under control. I think, unlike the Kansas legislature, we've got way too many people who have been serving in the United States House and the United States Senate for too long, and so another amendment would be term limits. Now, they're not gonna propose term limits on themselves.
Well, we'll see what happens.
So anyway, we needed 2/3, which is 84 votes, and we only got 74.
So
we're
not
not
likely at this
we're not
point.
signed on. We've got to get 34 states have to sign on to it. 20 have signed on so far.
Gentlemen, we are out of time this evening. Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us,
you, Becky.
Representative Sanders, Representative Rahjes, and thank you for joining us this evening with the Kansas Legislature. I'm Becky Kaiser.
In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains builds, operates, and maintains electric transmission infrastructure, connecting consumers to lower-cost energy sources to power our energy future. That means safe, secure, reliable electricity for those we serve. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.